All right, good evening. It is 5:30 on Wednesday, January 14th, 2015. This is the regular monthly meeting of the Urbana Human Relations Commission. Can I have a roll call, please?
Francis Ringberg Baker.
Here.
Kevin Bowersox Johnson.
Here.
Daniel Larson. Lisa Mosley.
Here.
Peter Resnick.
Here.
And Aisha Lam Sobe.
And we have squeaked by with a quorum for this evening. Thank you all for coming out this cold night. Our chair is under the weather, so I'm sitting in. Next item on the agenda is approval of the agenda itself. I would entertain a motion for approval.
I motion that we approve the agenda.
I second it.
Motion by Lisa, second by Fran. Any changes, additions to the agenda? All right. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Approval of the December 10th, 2014 minutes.
I'll move to approval of the minutes.
I second.
All right. A motion by Kevin, a second by Lisa. Any changes, additions, corrections to the minutes? All right. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, that motion carries. Public participation, seeing none at the moment, zipping right along. We have item 5, old business subcommittee report. Who is reporting? Is it going to be Kevin or Todd or?
No, actually, Dan asked if we could table this until the next meeting.
I think
So
that's just
we have a
fine.
chance to present.
Everybody okay with tabling?
Yes.
And so we will move that to next month's meeting and have that discussion. Which brings us finally to new business. And we have Chief Connolly here with us this evening. I'd invite you to come up, and I understand you're going to give us a report, and then I'm sure we'll have plenty of questions for you.
Absolutely. All righty. Good evening, everybody.
Evening.
Probably a week or so ago, Lisa contacted me and indicated that there were 2 questions that the Human Relations Commission had some questions about concerning the police department. First, does the police department provide training to officers that help them deal with awareness and minimize the risk of bias-based policing? And is the police department prepared for or thinking about the possibility of some civil unrest in our community and whether or not we talk about those or address those or train for those types of approaches? Kind of in a nutshell, those are the 2 things. So what I did tonight was put together a short PowerPoint program for you that I believe you'll be able to see at your chairs, that I will highlight hopefully both of those questions, and then I will certainly open it up to the zillions of questions that you have concerning those 2 topics. With respect to the training, I'm going to start with categorizing from the very first day at the as a new sworn police officer. We start with a basic training academy at the University of Illinois Police Training Institute. So all of our new police officers attend a 12-week. You literally live at the dormitory and you train for well over 8 hours a day concerning the basic training. From there, I'll talk a little bit about the training that's provided at the Police Training Institute and then how that transitions to the Urbana Police Department. As you can see on your side, Professor Helen Neville, Professor Sundiana Chejua, and Dr. Mike Slosher actually team teach all of the new recruits throughout the state of Illinois that attend the Police Training Institute a series of programs regarding cultural diversity and police minority relations. I could share with you hours and hours about this type of training. I could share with you hours and hours about how to deal or how they address the awareness, knowledge, and skill piece of it. But because I have so many other issues that we need to talk about, I did kind of prepare and summarize. And again, this is a Reader's Digest version. It doesn't do proper justice, but it kind of encapsulates the philosophy and the approach that the police start with, starting in day one. And I think it's so important to recognize that Dr. Slosher does such incredible work with the whole concept of integrating what you learn at the Police Training Institute with integrated scenarios, with practical exercises. And anytime you have which you've already contributed a great deal of your time till at 5:30 at night, but anytime you have some time, if you're ever interested in going to watch one of these programs, they're in the evening. I attended one of them last year, actually. There are 3 of them, and it's an incredible program that addresses just a ton of stuff concerning the whole cultural diversity approach. So I would invite you to do that. At any rate, I don't want to read verbatim all of that stuff, so I'm going to provide you with some written documentation that kind of encapsulates that type of stuff. The awareness piece talks a lot about, and Lisa, to some of the questions that you posed in your email, talks about everyone's own social identity. It helps them recognize their personal biases and their stereotypes. The knowledge piece talks about some historical perspectives. They do the case study of the mall, if any of you are familiar with it, big in the social service and social work arena, involving the logistical or the logistics of a mall, and then a young lady who was an employee there got actually hit and killed by a bus. And as they delved deeper into it, they realized that a new mall that was being built 1 mile from that location was the basis for this lawsuit for the family of this young lady who was hit and killed by this bus. And it was a fascinating study because they presented initially as this is a racially based event, according to the attorney, the plaintiff's attorney, the victim's attorney in this case, and they got the feedback from the 65 or 70 police officers that were in the room who always hear, you know, you're playing the race card or this is race-based, and it was fascinating to hear that dialogue. So I don't want to, it's sort of like telling you about a movie and then giving you the ending. But it's really a great opportunity to see from the foundation how police at the Police Training Institute are receiving training in the cultural diversity arena. And then they talk about a skills piece, and I'll tell you one of the best things, if you've ever heard Mike speak, he's great with a program called Verbal Judo, but it deals with the ability to communicate, talk about how to deal with people, and I want to share just a little of that with you, just so that you can get a flavor for what the police officers are exposed to, but more importantly, how it's reinforced throughout the 12 weeks at the Police Training Institute. After talking about the awareness and the knowledge and the skills, they talk about cultural competency, and then they also talk about the social justice piece. And this is the first portion of the integrated stuff where they actually get folks from the theater who role play and share a lot of feelings and talk a lot about their biases subliminally. And it's amazing how, and including myself at 56 years old, you say, wow, I felt the same experience, or I heard the same thing. So it really gets the students, the police cadets, in tune or in touch with a lot of feelings that I don't think they've been exposed to or thought about in the past. And that's what I thought was very good about this program. And again, I don't want to overwhelm you with information, but they talk a lot about the SARA model of problem-oriented policing, where they talk about looking at data, analyzing it, responding to it, and then redirecting their attention from it. So I'm trying to give you a very short overview of what the Police Training Institute provides. I can tell you that I attended a series of presentations. There are actually three-hour modules that are presented. I sat through it last year, and I was so impressed with it that we, and I'm going to talk about it in just a minute, we also have annual training here at the Police Training Institute for at the Urbana Police. And I asked Dr. Schlosser to present a Reader's Digest version of what I attended last year so that our entire police department can be exposed to it through that type of training. Again, the copies I will provide you at the end of the session, or unless you want to start reading them now, I'll just keep zipping through this. The communication piece. So after we talk about the awareness piece and we talk about the communication piece, it reinforces the goal of generating voluntary compliance, and that's something that's heavily emphasized. And I'm sharing this with you because I think it's really important that everybody understand when new recruits are exposed, for instance, from Southern Illinois, who have a racial demographic of 100% Caucasian, and now they're exposed to an incredibly diverse community here at the University of Illinois. It's amazing how many of them are literally have never been exposed to that, and they're somewhat shocked to it. And then as you go through the 12 weeks of training at the Police Training Institute, those folks that are learning and growing so much are also recognizing that, you know, you can speak to a Middle Easterner, or you can speak to a Korean, or you can speak to an African American, but the reality is there are certain issues that are universal, and he talks a lot about that in his presentation and in his training, and then it's reinforced, once again, through scenario-based training. Now, that philosophy doesn't only apply to the Police Training Institute. That philosophy also is carried over to the Urbana Police, because I happen to buy in and subscribe hook, line, and sinker to Mike's philosophy and presentation. One of the things I'll just run through very quickly is he talks a lot about the 5-step process, where you ask, you set the context. In other words, can you do me a favor, sir? Would you step out of the roadway? Why? Well, you need to step out of the roadway because we're blocking traffic, and if you don't step out of the roadway, somebody could get hurt. There could be other consequences. We need you to step out and we can talk. I also don't want to put myself in a position where I get hurt. You set those contexts. When you either gain compliance, you may restructure that approach a little bit, but excessive repetition, step out of the roadway, step out of the roadway, step out of the roadway, at some point becomes counterproductive. And then you at that point have to make some changes. So you confirm by talking with them and asking whether or not there's anything that they can say or do to get your voluntary compliance. And then, of course, the final step is to act. So as this is presented, it's very easy for me after 30 years of doing this to run through these. I can tell you a brand new recruit is their knees are shaking. They're trying, you know, it's like any test that you took in school. You're trying to recite verbatim the 5 steps in a chronological order, and you end up setting the context before you even identify yourself or ask the question. So over repetition, however, like our times tables, with excessive and spatial repetition, it becomes second nature for police officers through the academy to come out and present that. When I talk about the way that people want to be treated, regardless of their race or ethnicity, these 5 universal truths have been discussed from the very introduction at the Police Training Institute and at the graduation 12 weeks later at the Police Training Institute. And Mike Slosher, again, I have to recognize, just does a phenomenal job reinforcing that. But all people want to be treated with dignity and respect. All people want to be asked rather than told. All people want to be told why they're being asked to do something. All people want to be given options rather than threats. And all people want a second chance. Now, I'm not saying that always happens. We have to realize in the police arena, sometimes all of those universal truths are gone because it's a life safety issue or there are other circumstances. But if we start embedding this type of philosophy in our police officers from the first day at the Police Training Institute and reinforce it throughout that 12 weeks and reinforce it every time they go to the next section we'll talk about, which is the field training program, and they're now introduced to Urbana's policies and Urbana's approaches, or CAROs, or Fairview Heights, or wherever within the state of Illinois. If they're all introduced with that same philosophy, at least there's a good jump-off point, a good starting point for everybody to have a good knowledge to work from, and now maybe an approach to be able to deal with certain things. One of the other things that they emphasize to police recruits is you got to remember that police are oftentimes called during the absolute worst time. So from a PTI training perspective, these fundamental approaches and techniques are reinforced throughout that 12-week program, but the training doesn't stop there. So we emphasize that you as a police officer are going to be called sometimes to some horrific issues, very violent situations. And as we develop our, for 24 years, we've participated in a program called Shop with a Cop, where we try to introduce kids in our community by pairing up with police officers and going and shopping so that they can see the police in some light other than them taking their mom or dad away, them taking their their only source of income to county jail because there was a situation where the police were required to make an arrest. And unfortunately, that last vision of the police officer walking that loved one away is something that is long-lasting. So with this philosophy at the Police Training Institute, I think they're trying to instill in recruits that we have to do a better job as police officers to recognize that that is the case, and we can do some things proactively to try to change that mentality. The Urbana Police, as we transition from PTI, you've now completed 12 weeks at the Police Training Institute. The first thing you do is come to the Urbana Police Department, where for the next 3 months minimum, you are paired with a senior officer. He or she is referred to as a field training officer, where we then take the 123 directives from our manual, and we take our emergency manual, and we take the city policies, and we take all of this stuff, and over the course of the next 3 months, we try to instill in the officer at police training, they get the basic tactics, and now we tailor it to the Urbana Police. How do we specifically address community policing issues? How do we address use of force events? The Urbana Police, as you are aware, don't carry tasers currently. Other police agencies do. So there was this broad training, this basic training, and now we're doing some more specialized training, which is here at the Urbana Police Department. Over the last 4 years, I asked Lieutenant Joel Sanders, who is our training coordinator, to put together some stats for me after I spoke with you, Lisa, and he identified about 1,314 man-hours of training specifically addressing the topic of diversity. Between fiscal 2010 through 2014, the MTU training, which is mobile training units, are also providing training. So let me step back for just a minute. In the first bullet you see over the 4-year period, we have 1,314 hours of manpower or training hours specifically addressing that. If some of you recall, I know Lisa was there, I apologize if the others were, but we 2 years ago had a gentleman by the name of Andre Berry who presented a training program for us. I know Todd was there. And in that program, we did something somewhat innovative because people in the community were saying, what is your approach to training officers with diversity, and how do you address the multicultural diversity that you face every day at the university setting? So I invited Andre Berry to come and speak with us, who is literally a world-renowned trainer who presents on the ability for the police and the community to collaborate and work together in minority issues and regular police-related events. How do you build a better relationship between the police and the community, especially as it relates to the minority population? So Andre Berry was a part of that. Some of you attended that course as well. That alone was 440 hours because I required every police officer to attend that. Now, that was last year, the year before last. Last year, Mike Slosher came and committed 4 hours to each police officer that specifically related to dealing with the communications and the verbal judo end. He literally gave us a 3-day verbal judo course, and a lot of people don't like the label verbal judo, and yet and it was off, I think Dr. Thompson created this concept. But it really is a great opportunity for police officers who haven't been exposed, who haven't had the life experiences that some of you have, or those guys who are in the military who came back from deployments overseas, 3 or 4 of them, and have been exposed to cultural diversity that we haven't even been exposed to. It gives kind of everybody an opportunity to present a sequence, a pattern of responses that are very non-intrusive and yet unoffensive to anybody that they deal with. You look at the 5 universal truths, you recognize that that's the case, and now you back it up with your communication skills that are presented, even in something as simple as a traffic stop, where we actually, and you will see, because I review traffic stops every week, you will see an 8-step approach for every police officer to come up, identify himself, explain the purpose, and then go through this process. So Mike came and spoke with us about that specifically last year. So I provided you with the statistical training. We have the Police Training Institute, and then we have the annual training that the police department goes through, and then we have individual training through the MTU, which is the mobile training, where it could be from leadership, it could be on photography, it could be law for police. It is where supervisors are identifying people within their team who need either specialized training or have asked for specialized training. For instance, our crisis intervention team, our officers, 17 officers that currently participate in the crisis intervention team training. That's 40 hours. We can't train all our police officers simultaneously for that because it's cost prohibitive and we don't have the manpower to be able to pull them off of the street. So in addition to that, I don't want people doing specialty programs like crisis intervention where you literally have to take additional time working with mental health related issues, developing relationships with the hospital, developing relationships with folks from community elements. If you say, I really don't want to be here, I don't want to do that, instead I want to do this. So when we have those specialized training opportunities, I save it for those folks that want to be a part of that process. So we have the MTU, but in addition to that, we also have a training that we provide every evening, which is called roll call training. Now this isn't as formalized, it is documented, but it's documented on a police department basis, and it addresses everything from where is your beat assignment tonight to what is happening tonight, but it also addresses periodically, in fact, we address some issues that it's a very low frequency, but an incredibly high potential for problems. For instance, a use of force event. If I shoot someone, the frequency is almost non-existent, and yet the consequences of that one event, that one encounter, is devastating to the police department, to the legal department, to the community, to everybody involved. High-speed pursuits, very, very infrequently in our police department, and yet when they happen, the potential for liability is exorbitant because a family going through that intersection could be struck and T-boned and killed because we were chasing someone. So we review some very high-profile type of policies. Excited delirium is another example. It's excited delirium. We have a specific protocol where in the past, and well, I'll keep it very generic. In the past, police officers did the polyester pile. You know, 6 of them, because they wear polyester, all jumped on the guy. They held him down. There was a physical struggle. The guy is yelling, "I can't breathe." The officer's saying, "If you can talk, you can breathe." And ultimately, they get the person into custody. And then, lo and behold, as we're waiting to transport, or we see that there's a laceration on his head, or for whatever reason, he just stops breathing and dies. Well, over the years, we have learned that the philosophy of we all jump on them, we all hold them down, we all handcuff each other, pepper spray is involved. It wasn't effective, nor was the result ever something that we wanted to face, and that is that what we used to call positional asphyxia has now evolved to a more medical term called excited delirium. Some people don't subscribe to the philosophy. I certainly do. I think it's incredibly important. So we actually train all of our police officers to recognize the symptoms, and there are, it's the guy walking down the street who is in this weather, stripping. Well, as a matter of fact, February of last year, we had a very similar event. We had a guy walking down East Main Street, slitting his wrists, profusely sweating, wearing shorts in not sub-zero, but close to zero temperatures, and was was impervious to pain and was facing some real mental health related issues. Had we not taken that person into custody and got him the medical attention that he needed, it's very possible that we could have had yet another death. It's called an in-custody death because we have because we ran into that situation. So we have a specific protocol where if we even get a call, when our calls start at MedCAD, at the dispatch center, and they meet certain criteria. There's a guy who's not wearing a shirt. He's sweating profusely. He's walking down the middle of the road. You will see 6 police officers respond to that call. Not because it takes 6 police officers to beat somebody up, because it takes 6 police officers to specifically address that event and to do it in a manner. We actually get a paramedic rolling immediately on the way. They then make a determination whether they're going to actually field sedate the person, because studies have now shown that if we don't get him medical attention and reduce his blood pressure and his heart rate, he is going to die regardless of what we do. So ketamine or Versed are one of the 2 medications that are field administered, not through the police, but through a paramedic, and they make the call. They will actually field sedate him, and they don't go to the county jail. They go immediately to the hospital, because over the years we've learned that. So that was a long, drawn-out explanation for roll call training are the kinds of things that we talk about on a nightly basis that talk about that. And needless to say, when we have events like Ferguson and New York and Cleveland, we learn from those mistakes and we learn from those activities, and then we try to adjust our behavior based on what we learn in current events. So roll call training is yet another example of how we deal with that. Now, with that being said, I kind of ran through the progression of the types of trainings that were available specific to diversity type. I could talk a lot more about that, but I was going to kind of transition now into the next topic, which is how do we address civil unrest. So if you, Peter, whatever you want.
Yeah, do you want to, why don't we do questions while they're still fresh in people's minds and we're on this topic? So do folks have questions about what's been said so far? I've scribbled down some notes, but why don't we go around the circle here?
Could you get that to them?
I don't know that I have questions. I just didn't realize how intensive that you guys, the training that is provided. And again, we wouldn't know unless we asked this question.
Absolutely.
So it is great that you were able to be so thorough and provide this to
Good.
us.
And this is the information that I shared with you earlier. Again, you can read it at your leisure, but it's very informative. It's a great approach, and I would encourage you, if you have the time, I know you're already very committed, but if you have the time to, if you ever want to attend it, just call me and I'll be happy to make the arrangement.
Chief Conley, first of all, thanks for coming out tonight.
Absolutely.
I know you're a busy person. So, second, I just wanted you to know that I've actually had citizens of Urbana tell me how well the police have responded most recently in helping, in general, some protests that have gone on, and how it just went really smoothly, and part of that was thanks to the police's involvement, or lack of involvement when appropriate.
Understood.
So want to thank you for that, and thank the rest of the police officers for participating in that.
Thanks.
I guess one of my questions is, what are we doing even prior to training in the recruitment efforts? I think this looks great. It's really very thorough. I'm really thankful to know what they go through. How are we contributing to recruitment efforts for a more diverse police force?
Well, I wasn't prepared to share.
Okay,
I mean, so
that's fine.
Statistically, I won't be able to share a great deal of
Yeah.
information because that's a little off topic from the 2 that I was asked to discuss. But I can tell you that I have been incredibly, to the point of being aggressive, in trying to identify and recruit minority applicants. When I define minority, I'm not just referring to African American. Latino are very important. 17% of our population are Asian, and we need to look at a more diverse police department, not only in the African American community, but for all minorities. So we are invited to and attend a variety of different job fairs where we present to a number of organizations at the University of Illinois. In the world of websites and Twitter and Facebook, our person, Liz Borman, does an incredible job of reaching out and expanding the diversity pool. I'll tell you, and again, it's a totally different topic, and I'll be happy to come and talk with you about it anytime you want to listen, but I am an absolute firm believer that our military veterans, many of whom are minority, by the way, are an incredible pool of potential applicants who have faced life experiences second to none. And as a result of that, I reach out to and actively recruit military veterans by actually sending information to a variety of military bases before they separate from the military. So the police department reaches out in a number of ways. I just came, as a matter of fact, I was a little late tonight because I just came back from the Community Coalition meeting that I am a firm believer in, have attended, with the exception of one where I was out of town, every meeting every month, which is initially started as a result of the Kewan Carrington shooting. But it has now evolved into something that is much grander and much better, and we're getting a much bigger base of participants from throughout the community, faith-based, citizens, police agencies, the chief, the sheriff, Chief Cobb, the sheriff, Chief Christensen from the U of I, and myself attend almost every one of those meetings. And with that, we're reaching a much broader community population, and our recruiting efforts are through them as well. I have found that it's almost better to participate in those types of events, and then you develop relationships one-on-one, and then all of a sudden a pastor comes up to me and says, hey, I got a kid who might be interested in this. My next step is, and I'm sure anybody who knows me sees me, I should have stock in Starbucks because I live there. And that's where I meet and I talk and I share what the police department is. We put them in a squad car, and I say we put them. Anybody who's interested in being a police officer or learning about the law enforcement career field. We put them in a squad car so that they get a better understanding of what they're getting into. Because watching cops on television is not what policing is all about. And yet invariably that's what I hear from people. So I think our rate, am I satisfied with our efforts? Absolutely not. Is there always room for additional approaches? Absolutely. But I feel pretty comfortable in knowing that we're making an aggressive effort to try to include as many people in our community as possible.
Thank you.
You bet.
And again, thanks for the presentation. One, as a member of the LGBT community, and I want to bring this voice, one recommendation for updating this, especially if we're going to put it available to the public, if we could change language like man hours to staff hours, it comes across as more diverse in itself.
Got it. Perfect. I apologize for
No.
that, and that's a great observation, and
No, I
didn't
appreciate
mean to be
you
insensitive.
taking that. No, I appreciate you taking that feedback.
absolutely.
Anybody else? I had a couple of questions. You mentioned cadets and recruits going through the PTI training. How long has that training been available, and what percentage of officers have gone through the diversity training at PTI, or how many are so senior that they've never seen, that they've never gone through that training, but they've gone through the Reader's Digest version, as you put it?
Sure, and that's a great question. Mike Slosher actually spearheaded the program that I shared with you this evening. So I would probably say a majority of our senior police officers have not gone through the type of scenario-based training. But then again, a majority of our officers, at the time they went through PTI, went through a 6-week program, not a 12-week program. So training has evolved immensely over the years, but I will credit Mike Slosher with the last 2.5 years of sending through. So probably our last 7 recruits or 8 recruits have gone through that training.
And what is the force now? I don't even know.
55.
55.
Right.
Okay.
It hasn't changed much in a long time, Peter, so if you can help me. It's amazing that our population has grown and our geographic boundaries have grown and our crimes have increased, but our police, I was going to say manpower level. See, I'm already more aware, Kevin, thank you.
Force, yes,
Our
level,
Our
staff
police
level,
force has remained pretty stagnant.
Well, I'll leave the hard question for last.
Alrighty.
The other easy question I had, you talked about the Urbana procedures that everybody goes through after they get out of PTI.
Yes.
And that you've had folks, and Andre, I've forgotten his last name, Barry, going through and working with you on those procedures and how to train on those. Is there any interaction between you and, for instance, I know we've never had a discussion directly about police procedures or maybe with the Civilian Review Board about going over those on some sort of regular basis to talk about maybe things that the community could bring to those procedures and say, the way this is written, it might have some interesting impact, and having those discussions. I don't know if the program you were talking about that you go to regularly has discussions about procedure, or is there an interaction between either the community, the administration, commissions, regarding how procedures are come up with and how they are changed over time?
Well,
This was my easier one.
oh, why? Well, I can tell you this. In February of 2014, we encountered yet another event where I went to the mayor and said, look, it's really important. I know we've talked about on a very limited use to get tasers available to a certain number of specially trained police officers. And 1 year later, in just 2 weeks, we have still not yet resolved that issue. I worked very closely with the CPR. In fact, Scott Dossett and Ricardo Diaz served on a subcommittee. They were incredibly helpful. We spent 45 minutes on one paragraph involving the terminology of one section of one policy.
And with a controversial topic like that, I mean, those are, of course, the most painful to go through and take the most amount of time. But I was wondering, just on a more general, on the less controversial and straightforward stuff, whether there's any sort of regular review and whether there's interaction with either the mayor's office or different folks in the community about those.
Right. Sylvia Morgan, who's the deputy chief, who is actually, as we speak, in Quantico, Virginia, attending the FBI National Academy, so she's out of the fight for 10 weeks, is in the process, along with our leadership team. There were 3 additional lieutenants, Sylvia Morgan and myself comprised the leadership team. And they have been painstakingly, there is a program called Lexapol, which is a policy development program that brings you into the 21st century and does some incredible stuff with respect to pairing the needs of the community with the legal aspects of it. And they have been in the process of redeveloping our directives manual or policy manual, same thing, for the last year and a half. And I'm happy to report that we are relatively close, within several months, of getting the shell of that new policy program developed. It's been an incredible, intensive amount of time that was committed to that. But once that is done, I fully intended on saying we are going to be even more comfortable in our transparency. Now, with respect to certain policies, how do you address approaching a bank robbery? It would be with, how do you pursue, what is the protocol for pursuing a vehicle? There are certain policies that we wouldn't compromise just because it would provide the law enforcement tactics that would enable people to defeat those. But a lot of the general policies are actually going to go on the website so that I am happy to share. Now, as you know, you could file a Freedom of Information Act right now on a majority of the policies, and with the exception of those few, you're able to get those now. I have talked with groups about specific policies. I have included groups as part of the policy making for certain policies, but as a general, every week we're going to review this policy this week, I have never entertained that.
But that transparency that you're talking about, if a lot of those policies are now going to become very public and people can review them and maybe get the feedback through different channels, that sounds like a great approach. So my difficult question, and it's just, I think there's no answer here. I'm looking for just what your thoughts and feedback are. You mentioned new recruits starting out the job with their knees shaking, and that brought to mind, of late there's been, in the news, dashboard cams and other interactions where when things go bad, it seems like both the police and the community member they're interacting with, fear is a major driver. Everybody's hyped up, everybody's worried about their safety, and this is on both sides. And when things go right, it's often because the officer is calm, and there was one recent one in New York, a mentally ill person in a library who had a knife. And the officer, you watched it, and it was just amazing to watch. The officer was very alert and obviously concerned about their safety, but calm voice and good interaction. And that fear also gets driven, I think, by fears of people who are different than you and people with different experiences. And that goes, again, in both directions. Community members who see police officers who they don't recognize and aren't the same as them. Is there specific training about both dealing with officers' own fears, and I know we hear a lot about, well, an officer has to be concerned with their safety primarily, but that can heighten their anxiety and fear going into a situation.
Sure.
And dealing with community fears, knowing that when you're approaching someone, that person might be fearful of you as an officer.
Sure.
Does that training occur in some way?
Absolutely occurs. As a matter of fact, I think that was it. If that was the difficult one, this is actually very easy.
Good.
And I say it's easy because we have a device, a tool that's actually housed just down the street from here called the Decision Making Simulator. And we ask police officers to go through it. As a matter of fact, even on midnights, police officer, we have, it's technologically, it's rather difficult. I couldn't run it because what it does is presents an event on a screen. The scenario is set up so that you can actually present 300 different scenarios. You're given pepper spray, you're given a firearm, you're given a flashlight, you're given a baton. The operator then presents you with the scenario and they ask you to run through it. And the whole concept of the training is to help with verbal skills, help de-escalate events, recognize that when it's called safer violations in this whole verbal judo thing, but when a gun is being pointed at you, it is not now time to say, sir, my name is Officer so-and-so, and you have to act. So there are certain scenarios where this is available. And the key to this training is if you are able to articulate correctly using some key words to de-escalate the event, the operator can actually, it's called bridging, can actually change the scenario from something that could be very negative to something very positive, and you obtain voluntary compliance. So our police department, actually, it's actually the last slide on this book, but the Citizen Police Academy, which I would encourage any of you, police officer or the chief, can sponsor anybody. It's unfortunately a Thursday night commitment for 10 weeks, but it's 3 hours on a Thursday night, and you are literally put through a mini police training at the Police Training Institute. It's every Thursday evening. So you get trained on drugs, you get trained on how does the SWAT team work, you get trained on domestic violence, and you also come to our decision-making simulator, and you're put in a position where you're given a scenario, the tools, recognizing, of course, that you haven't had the same training that those coming out of PTI have, but you're confronted with the real possibility. Now, the good news is in this controlled environment, you won't get hurt. But I always tell people, now this is going to shoot just little plastic balls, so it's going to sting a lot, but it won't kill you. And it's amazing how people respond differently knowing that there is a consequence if they make a mistake. Now I will share, and I'm kind of blowing it for the people in the future, if you're listening audience, there really isn't a sting, there isn't something that's going to shoot back at you. But that additional level of anxiety has you do certain things very quickly. And I would love the opportunity to show you that type of training so that you can experience it yourself, run through it, and understand that training is perpetual. Training doesn't stop at PTI, it starts at PTI. So we are constantly trying to identify different issues as we encounter them throughout the community, and then we try to tailor our training so that we can better serve the people by making police officers more comfortable and knowledgeable. The next segment that I was going to talk about identifies that very thing. So
why don't we go on from there,
Okay.
unless others have more questions?
Sounds good.
Great,
All
thank
right,
you.
so I'm going to transition now from the training to the second question that Lisa presented, which was how do police officers deal with civil unrest? How do they address that anxiety level? How do they prepare? And again, I'm going to go to the basics, because actually in 2006, in 1996, Champaign County developed the training that is referred to as the Metro-Dade Mobile Field Force. In 1996, we saw a need in our community to provide some additional training because of the university, very candidly, because of the potential for celebratory violence, because of the potential for all sorts of events, 100% First Amendment protected legal protests that could get out of hand. I can tell you that historically police agencies throughout the country are trained by their police agency. As a matter of fact, we just introduced Mobile Field Force to the Basic Academy because historically it was so infrequent that many police agencies never trained on crisis management, confrontation management, riot control, whatever term you want to use, because they've never been exposed to it, and it very rarely hits their community. Or if they are trained, they get a 4-hour block of instruction, and then remember that spatial repetition that I talked about earlier? Never again do you see it in your 30-year career. We saw that as a problem in Champaign County, so we introduced the Metro-Dade Mobile Field Force concept. The problem with that concept is I then expanded the key to good training is getting best practices throughout the country, not thinking your set way of doing things is the only way and therefore it's got to be the best and the hell with everybody else. So we started going to different locations and saying, look, we brought these trainers in, we trained our police, all of our police in Champaign County, kind of pooled our resources, and we started training on that concept. But as I then started traveling to say, is this the best approach, I ended up in East Lansing, Michigan. And East Lansing, Michigan used the same exact tactics and techniques that we did, which was the Metro-Dade Mobile Field Force training. And we saw after, as I'm sure you're aware, or those who aren't aware, Michigan State University is always in the Final Four in everything. Yeah. I mean, they're incredible. And if they don't win the national championship, especially in basketball, if they don't win, they're always in the Final Four. Unfortunately, a culture developed in East Lansing, Michigan, where regardless of whether they won or lost, the city almost burned down. You saw it at Ohio State this weekend, as a matter of fact. That celebratory violence, in this case, Ohio State won the national championship, so people burned cars, people burned a lot of stuff, and there was unfortunately, a lot of violence associated with this celebratory event. East Lansing, Michigan was being exposed to that, and I happened to go simply to observe, and I watched as the police literally, thinking that they were using the best practices, deployed 30 canisters of gas to move the crowd and then pushed it down the block only to displace it to another gathering spot 2 blocks down the road. And they dispensed 30 more launchable types of gas to move the crowd because they were burning things and breaking windows. I mean, they were in a mob action mentality. And that whole line of police officers then moved them 2 blocks down the road. And then I watched the Taco Bell burn down. And I said, maybe this isn't the best practice. So we started looking more at other approaches. And in 2006, we developed, actually in the state of Illinois, through the Illinois Law Enforcement Alarm System, ILEAS, the building on East Main that you see a big sign that says IL, that the ILEAS logo out there. they developed a program called the ILEAS Mobile Field Force Teams. So there are actually 10 teams with 670 police officers throughout the state of Illinois who are trained specifically and quarterly on confrontation management. And I'm not talking about just learning the techniques, the tactics. I'm talking about developing a psychological awareness, developing a philosophy that is literally any of those 670 police officers can be integrated in any team. So if we had some teams in northern Illinois, as an example, who think, man, the only way to deal with this problem is to hit them with sticks and beat them up, and then a team from southern Illinois who says, wait a minute, let's approach it in this fashion. If we didn't teach a universal approach, not only philosophically, but also the tactics, it would be ineffective. So the ILEAS Mobile Field Force teams teach the same philosophy with the same tactics, with the same approach, so that literally you could grab an officer from Cairo, Illinois, and embed him with an officer from Kankakee, Illinois, and they will understand all the hand signals, they will all understand the philosophy, they will understand the approach, and they will understand the direction that the ILEAS Mobile Field Force teams go. So it was actually developed after Katrina, the Hurricane Katrina was introduced. A lot of police officers were needed down there. The state of Illinois volunteered some folks. At that time, there was no mobile field force team, but there were weapons of mass destruction teams. There were SWAT teams that were already trained together or already capable of deploying. So they sent all these SWAT guys down, and all these SWAT guys said, wait a minute, what do you mean we're going to evacuate? And I'm not criticizing SWAT, but SWAT has a very unique role, and they were asked to change their whole, it was a paradigm shift second to none, because they weren't going to go in there and control the bridges where you saw the shooting and whatnot. They were going to go evacuate senior citizens from old age homes. And the SWAT guys were saying, wait a minute, what are you talking about? And then we had pharmaceutical stockpiles that needed to be addressed. And they said, well, you're going to protect this valuable medication for all of these folks that need it. And they said, wait a minute, that's not our role and function. So as a result of that, I think a lot of people in Illinois recognized that they needed to create a different type of team that was capable of dealing more with interacting with people, regardless of whether it's protecting pharmaceutical stockpiles, working in a police-involved shooting where tension is very high, addressing celebratory violence, dealing with the Democratic National Convention or the Republican National Convention or the G20 Summit. And hence the ILEAS Mobile Field Force teams were formed. It's rather hard to see, but we are in the blue. Champaign County is, so all the teams out of Region 7 are ILEAS Region 7 Mobile Field Force team. Deputy Chief Skip Frost from the University of Illinois Police Department is the commander of Region 7. He's with the University Police. It's a perfect fit because Skip has worked with dealing with students and First Amendment protests and all of the issues associated with a university setting, a major university setting. And the 56 officers that are assigned to the Region Mobile Field Force team come and train quarterly with Skip Frost and his leadership team. And I'm going to review very quickly just a bit of the training that they present. So whether it's civil unrest, whether it's a unprovoked shooting, whether it's a pre-planned event where there are going to be marches as a result of expressing their First Amendment, which we've had a few here in our community before the holidays, expressing their First Amendment right for freedom of gathering and free speech and addressing social issues, the mobile field force teams are designed to be able to address that. The old sticks and shields that were a thing of the past, which is what we saw, quite frankly, in 1996 with the Metro-Dade mobile field force teams, were actually altered. The shield, we found, quite frankly, was almost a magnet, especially to a lot of drunk college students. So you're taking a defensive posture and saying, we drew a line in the sand, you're not going to cross this. It was truly an invitation to say, let's see how many bottles could be thrown, especially if you had a left-hander in there, where the police is upside down, because unlike everybody else who has it in their right hand and it reads police, a left-hander would flip it up the opposite way, so police was upside down. And that was just, we saw it at East Lansing, we saw it in all over the country when we trained and visited these different sites to say that what we need is uniformity, we need to get rid of that shield, we need to be a more mobile, a smaller group of people that are specially trained with much smaller sticks, because the baseball bats that were issued in the past are completely ineffective, and quite frankly, there's a potential for abuse with those. So the whole mindset changed, and the teams that, again, this is a voluntary program. We're not making people be a part of this. Urbana Police has 8 ILEAS Mobile Field Force team members on their department. But here's the good thing about ILEAS Mobile Field Force. If we had a pre-planned event, as an example, the marathon. We had a marathon shortly after as a matter of fact, several weeks after the Boston bombing. A lot of people were very concerned, so we activated ILEAS Mobile Field Force Region 7. They didn't come with helmets and heavy vests and turtle suits. They came in police attire. They were trained specifically to interact with the crowd, provide additional security, and provide a sense of safety to the tons of people that were here visiting our community on that day. So it was an incredibly useful use of resources. 56 from all over Region 7 came. Champaign-Urbana, Champaign County, and the University of Illinois each contribute a number of officers, but certainly we couldn't get 56. In addition to that, there are 10 teams throughout the state, so if we needed 5 mobile field force teams, we would be able to draw on the resources, all being provided with the same training and the same philosophy. The point of training goes way beyond the tactics. We can learn how to march, and we can learn how to encircle someone, and we can learn how to effectively arrest them, and we can learn how to separate crowds. But what we need to do, and what we emphasize at ILEAS Mobile Field Force, and by the way, the reason I say we is because I'm the primary instructor in this and have been for the last 11 years. Because I think it's so important that what we do is understand philosophically and get it in the mindset of the officer who's coming from Cairo, who may not be exposed to that same diversity that we are, that they need to understand up front, these are the guidelines that you have to follow. So what I did was brought the 6 basic guidelines with me this evening. I'm again condensing it's a 3-day course that is literally packed for 10 hours a day, and I'm reducing it to hopefully 10 minutes. So I provided you with the guidelines, but I will share those with you. But in a nutshell, conduct and not content is something that we really have to emphasize. And it's really important that police officers who participate in the mobile field force teams, not just Region 7s, not just Urbanas, not just Region 7s, but the 700 plus officers that can be embedded from any one of the 10 mobile field force teams throughout the state have to maintain the same philosophy. So it's really important. And this picture that you see is actually from Denver, where the Westboro Baptist Church was expressing their constitutional right to share their opinion about certain issues, and it became a very volatile situation because not everybody accepts the same philosophy. But the reality is, if a police officer, especially in the role of a mobile field force officer, is put in a position where they say, I can't stand the Westboro Baptist Church, we've defeated the purpose of the concept already. So what we have to do is recognize that we have to put our professionalism above that. From day one of the base, and I'm jumping ahead because I've taken up too much time already, but the basic training is 3 days. There's a 202 course, there's a tabletop exercise, there's just a supervisor training, and now we are in the 5th year, which is lane training. And lane training is honing the skills of all the different, the LRAD, which is the long-range acoustical device. Oftentimes, you saw it throughout the nation being misused, and they said, look, it's a weapon of war, it's a torture tool, because there's a horrific wavering sound that can be used. We teach the proper way to use the LRAD so that it gets the attention of the audience, and then they give clear, concise directions that they actually have to create. Because quite honestly, in our studies, the #1 lawsuit that most police agencies dealing with confrontation management face is that those that are filing the class action suit or the individual lawsuit said, look, if we only knew that we were supposed to leave the area, we would have complied. That piggybacks then on, so the LRAD is the tool that ensures that people have the ability to hear what's going on. But it can't be misused, so you have to train on it. So the lane training provides that type of training and a lot of other stuff. The philosophy of conduct and not content is reinforced with, I don't know if anybody's from the university setting, Clark McPhail is a professor emeritus at the University of Illinois. He's absolutely incredible. During the Final Four in 2004, Clark McPhail was presenting a program. I was actually the Mobile Field Force commander that was going to be responsible for dealing with the celebratory violence that we anticipated here at the university. So weeks before, in anticipation of the problem, we started meeting, what if we actually get there? Are we going to be prepared for this? And Professor McPhail I came in late to a meeting, and Professor McPhail was explaining to the chancellor and to a lot of other people in the group about how he felt it was really important that we carried the message early. And during the Vietnam conflict, he was out west, and he actually presented a daisy to people and encouraged them to then share that daisy with another person to say, we recognize that you are going to gather, we recognize you are emotional about this gathering, but we're asking for you to do it in a peaceful manner. And of course, Pat Conley, who can't learn anything because he knew it all, looks at this professor and says, I am not going to pass out daisies to people to keep them compliant with the Final Four. And then this pea-brain of mine, as I continued meeting with him and listening and learning and recognizing that he was the author of like 7 books, who traveled to England and dealt with the hooligans. And, you know, in Europe, soccer is incredible, and that people actually travel hundreds of miles to fight with one another. And he studied all of this stuff. And throughout the course of the next couple of weeks, I started thinking, oh my God, he's incredible. I actually, I drank his Kool-Aid. I bought into the philosophy that 99% of the people at the event, we're talking about 10,000 people at an anti-war protest in Denver, Colorado. And literally the anarchists, the people that were there for the sole purpose of disrupting and causing anarchy and criminal law violators, were literally 300 out of 10,000. And the mindset, though, of the police, Pat Connolly and everybody else before me, who the first time they faced that 10,000 person group walking at them was, oh my God, we need a bigger boat. There's no way that we're going to be able to deal with this. And then as you start to recognize, but wait a minute, of that 10,000 coming at me, there is my mom and dad and my family and my neighbors and my friends and my brothers and my sisters and those people who have parents who are police officers. And all of a sudden you recognize that that 10,000 person mass is not 10,000 people acting in unison. They may all have the same philosophy, which is we're opposed to the war. We're opposed to whatever agenda item they are carrying. The reality is the police need to start recognizing it's not them against us. It's we have to address this through these 6 basic guidelines. So again, I could talk for hours about this, and I apologize for it, and I'm not going to, but the tolerance is something that we really, really, really emphasize. So it's at the basic level. And again, Kevin, I'm going to provide you with this. So I should have, maybe Tony, you can give it now because I see notes. And this PowerPoint is available. You're welcome to it. But tolerance is something that we overemphasize, especially when we talk about emotionally charged event like police-involved shootings. So in answer, long drawn-out answer to your question, Lisa, about whether or not, or Peter, whether the police prepare officers for the mindset, the answer is we absolutely try to prepare them. Now, can we control the emotion when somebody's getting rocks thrown at them, or there's a Molotov cocktail, or there's active gunfire? You know, the reality is at some point police officers have to defend themselves, police officers have to recognize, but you know, and I always saw the analogy, and it's phenomenal. It was at a stress class. Can you imagine me having to go to a stress class? It was at a stress class where the instructor said, police are oftentimes, if you had to use an analogy, they are like a sheepdog. They are responsible for making sure that the herd is safe. And they constantly are trying to keep people in check through traffic stops and through different events, thefts, and different criminal behavior, but they're just nipping at their feet to make sure that everybody stays in line. And then all of a sudden the wolf comes, and the sheepdog's responsibility is now 100% focused on that wolf that's now trying to hurt or kill somebody, and they're actually intervening on behalf of all the sheep. And then as soon as that event is done, they're back to herding the sheep. So, and that's what if you ride along with the police, you will see that, again, unlike cops, you will see that the police could be driving for 2 hours with no added blood pressure, and then all of a sudden you get a call of shots fired, and you're gone, and your anxiety level is way up here. And now it's all the way back down here because the event is over, and you've reached your catharsis by talking with your fellow officers, and now all of a sudden you get a call of a burglary. And to that person, that trauma of, my God, I have never felt so violated because somebody actually entered my home and took my laptop or my television. To them, that's the most traumatic event in their life to some people. Yet the police officer was just getting shot at or involved in an event where shots were fired and somebody was hurt. And now they're expected to show the compassion and the emotional support that this person who's faced with this trauma. So going through that is a very difficult role. And I use that that illustration because in mobile field force events, that's precisely how it is. It's nothing, and then all of a sudden it is that 15 or 20 anarchists that are breaking windows, and now you're all juiced up and you're going to deal with that. But more importantly, when you emphasize the tolerance, you're going to see people with bandanas on their face. You're going to be exposed to people with N95 masks, which are the masks that, at hospitals for the flu, because they're preparing themselves for OC or pepper spray or gas that's being introduced by the police. You're going to see medics who have red tape on their back. So there is a system, not only to the police in the training, but also to those that are coming to demonstrate. So tolerance is something that's overemphasized during the basic course and reiterated during the 202 course, and I say that's the advanced course, where we bring back officers involved in the team after 1.5 years. So I'm going to just zip through the rest of them because I've taken far too much time. But restraint is, again, something that is overemphasized, and we illustrate that through a lot of actual videos. For instance, if you notice, you can see the guy who actually stepped forward and blew smoke under the visor of this police officer. And that alone could have, you can see the officer gripping his baton. You can see he's probably gritting his teeth. Had that person pushed it even further, it's potentially the officer could have said enough is enough, and now he's going to react. But if you look in the background of that, maybe if you look right here on the pointer, you can see that actually they were videotaping that for that very response. And when I say they, I mean there are anarchist groups. There are groups who intentionally try to provoke the police for the sole purpose of then putting it all over the internet to say, see how the police respond. So restraint is something that we emphasize, and we introduce that through a lot of video that we've captured over the years. And we try to help create a mindset with the police officers to have the ability to recognize that and deal with it. Reasonableness, we're talking about not only the use of force events, but Graham versus Connor, we're talking about everybody. It's impossible for the 300 police officers assigned to this event to arrest 10,000 people at an event. Physically impossible, logistically it would be impossible, and the reality is there has to be reasonableness introduced, and we talk a great deal about that as well. So the big picture, what we're talking about obviously is everything that you do and say today, literally you might as well recognize that it's going to be on CNN and Fox and every other news station in the nation because of this instant media. So we have to recognize that we have so much more to do, and we have to respond much deeper than that situation that's occurring right there. I am not going to Monday morning quarterback. I'm not going to criticize. I wasn't there. I don't know any of the, I don't think any of us really know any of the details concerning Ferguson. But a great example of what I'm saying is we have to think of the big picture, and we have a police officer who's got a .308 rifle with a scope looking into the crowd, scanning the crowd, because he was concerned that there may be potential gunfire. Even if there was, the big picture is we have binoculars for that. We have the ability to one of the basic tactics is elevation. If you are elevated, you can see much more. So there are different tactics in which the police can accomplish the same goal without creating a perception of militarization of police or whatever you want to call it. So we need to look at the big picture, and we overemphasize that in the training that we present. So last but not least, I want to talk about the fact that Clark McPhail, Professor McPhail, who I just love and still have breakfast with occasionally, really pounded this home that you have to deal with individual behavior and not crowds or groups. In fact, he doesn't even like the term crowd because there's connotations of illegal activity. He refers to them as gathering, and each gathering has a very distinct beginning, middle, and an end. And the police can intervene at each one of those, but typically the police have to react in that crisis mode when they're in a state where if we just addressed it earlier. So we actually teach that during the basic and during the advanced course. And most importantly, getting off track a little bit, is the fact that the supervisors are actually the key to that, just like they are on the street. The supervisor can't be engaged in the event. He has to move the chess pieces because the supervisor is going to recognize the officer who says, that's it, my tolerance has reached its boiling point, I'm now going to actively engage. And that supervisor needs to grab them and say, slow down, recognize what you're doing, understand our mission here. So that's really important that the supervisors get this training as well. So I'm gonna leave it at this. Again, the PowerPoint is available. We do have a number of other courses that we present, but when training becomes available, it's typically out at the ILEAS Training Center. So if you're ever interested in that type of training, even if you want to stop by for a little bit, just shoot me an email and I will be happy to make the arrangements for you. With that, I'll open it up to questions, I guess.
And yes, and this, I must thank you. I mean, this was an incredible amount of information and very dense.
I apologize
And so,
for that.
no, I, in a good way, and we very much appreciate it. We may have questions that we'll have to follow up with
Absolutely.
after. But does anybody have any questions right now? I think, yes, again, this is an incredible amount of information. There's some stuff that is just incredibly thought-provoking, and I think we're going to continue our discussions,
Good.
and we may follow up with you
Please do.
and ask you to give us some more information about things we may have questions about.
Absolutely.
And I just wanted to
Please.
state, on such a short notice, too, you were able to pull this together. So we're very impressed, or I'll speak for myself, I'm very impressed that you could do that in such a short time. You do take it serious. You're very passionate about it, and we appreciate those efforts, and I think the citizens of Urbana should appreciate that as well.
Thank you. So Todd, I will leave this. I'll get with Jason tomorrow so we can get it on the
The website.
Human Relations Commission website.
Yeah,
Okay,
that'd be
I'll make
great.
those arrangements.
Thank you so
All right, good
much,
night.
Chief.
Thank you.
All right.
Yes.
We'll try and speed through the last bit of our meeting. And that was an incredible amount and quality of information. And I'm left with a bunch of stuff spinning around in my head, but I want to get it down on paper, and we can pass some stuff off to the chief through Todd, and I'm sure we can get some answers back. All right, so let's go on to staff report. We've got a couple of approvals of EEO statistics. Todd, do you want to introduce those quickly?
Sure. We have one new one, Spartan ERV, and they are a fairly, I think they were formerly another company, and they've sort of reorganized into Spartan. You've got your staff recommendations here, and I'm happy to take any questions regarding them. If you see, the first two have total minority populations, or total minority proportions of about 9.1%, so that That's not quite what we're looking for. We're looking for right between 12 and 14%, but it's close enough to where we feel that they should be granted a provisional with 1 year. Martin Brothers, I think that's logistics. We're looking at a 16.7. Obviously, they're hitting the mark. You know, they're a small firm, so and,
Right.
and anything under 15 generally we just allow a pass on. Farnsworth Group is a little bit more interesting. Obviously, they've done quite a bit of hiring over the last couple of years, and what we're seeing here is the rate of change amongst the minority population is greater. The increase is greater than it is amongst the general or total population of employees, and so we sort of talked about 6 months or a year. We were thinking that even though we're seeing improvement, the numbers are still so low that it may bear watching at 6 month intervals. But again, we're obviously very flexible on that, and we'll take whatever amendments or changes that you deem appropriate.
Any questions for Todd about the staff recommendations? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
I move that we accept staff recommendations on Spartan ERV, TSI Commercial Floor Covering, Martin Brothers Logistics, and the Farnsworth Group.
All right, so that is respectively 1 year, 1 year, 2 years, and 6 months. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All right, so motion by Fran, second by Kevin. Any further discussion of these? All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so that motion carries. Great. Moving on to the activity report, Todd. That's all yours.
Mr. Bowersox, did you have a question? Okay, you're sure.
It was more of just a comment that, like, at a community group that I visited to help in recruitment, one of the questions they ask is, what do we do really that is concrete in helping in efforts in regards to promoting employment and housing for minorities? And I just feel like, kind of what we just did is one very concrete thing that, deciding whether or not somebody has the ability to contract with the city based on these statistics and based on whether or not they meet our requirements for the number of staff that meet minority requirements, I think is one very concrete thing of what this commission does to prove that we are committed to this. So, thank you.
I appreciate you saying that, because this does get very rote after a while. We do this monthly. On the other hand, when we encounter situations where employers aren't making the grade, we do have extensive discussions and push back on that. So I think we do good. So I appreciate the comment. So Todd, the activity report.
Sure. So if you take a look at the January 2015 substantial contacts, we've had basically a couple since our last meeting. The first one was based upon gender and retaliation. That was referred to IDHR. And that was in December. And then we recently had one in employment. There was no protected class that was implicated, therefore no jurisdiction. And that was recently in January. If you look at our case status report at the UC 140201, probable cause has been issued, and we're beyond the 42-day window, and so we're scheduling that. We're going to move forward with scheduling that for public hearing. At UC 140504, we're still working on the determination. It's just kind of a complex, squirrely kind of thing that we have to, I don't want to call it squirrely, but it's something that we've got to sort of spend quite a bit of time with, and it is not complete. UC 141006 is a national origin case. We were contacted by the respondent who let us know that they were making good efforts towards figuring out some type of accommodation. Oftentimes with public accommodation cases, what you're looking at, what you're looking for. Similarly with housing issues, you're looking for a resolution. You want to bring people sort of into compliance, and maybe the better word to say is you want their activities to, you want to make sure that they're reasonably related to the thing that they're trying to get to with the restriction or whatever they're doing. And so I'm very encouraged by the fact that they're sort of looking at that they're looking at their policy and reevaluating its impact, and will presumably come back to us with some type of proposal for a resolution of the problem going forward. So we'll see. If not, we'll go forward with the investigation. But we wanted to provide them with an opportunity with some time to do that, particularly with the holidays. Then UC 141107, we're currently awaiting an initial response. We've had some conversations with the respondents in that case also, and I would anticipate getting a response within the next couple of weeks.
Any questions for Todd? The first one that we're planning on scheduling a hearing, will this be under our new rules, or are we going to use the traditional rules?
You know what? There aren't a lot of facts to this case. And really the new rules were meant for those very fact-intensive
Yes.
cases. So I think that it should be something that's probably your sort of discussion. I will tell you, there may be some sort of disputed facts in the case. I'm not exactly sure how relevant those disputed facts will be. You know, it seems to me that the relevant facts are very limited and they're very clear. I think this has to do, the question has to do more with the community standards and therefore your standards for enforcement of the human rights ordinance, as opposed to trying to evaluate whether or not something did or did not happen, if that makes any sense.
It does.
And so I think that should be something that we discuss. I'd like to get the hearing sort of on the books, and certainly I don't anticipate it occurring before the next meeting. But I think we really should spend some time discussing whether or not, I think an ALJ would do a great job with this. I just don't think this is the situation that we
We designed
had
the
in
rules for,
mind
yeah.
Right.
when we looked at the new rules.
Okay.
And I'm happy to do whatever you all would like to do. And I'm trying to represent the content of the case without really giving you too much information about it. But I think it could go either way. I don't anticipate that the testimony would go over, certainly not over 8 hours, but I'm guessing more like 4 hours. So I'm guessing maybe a couple of nights.
Gotcha. That was my
That
question.
seems relatively sane compared to the previous cases we've had,
Yeah.
which caused us to come up with the new set of rules. So.
Yes, it's definitely not in that category, at least not to my estimation. Maybe I'll consult with legal. Michelle Brooks has been part of the reasoning process for the determination, so I'll just double check with her to see if she has any reason to believe that it would be more than that. But I think I'm looking at maybe, reasonably 4 to 6 hours.
That
Okay.
sounds great.
Yeah, that seems reasonable. Any other comments or questions? Great. Then your last item, I believe, is the budget report.
Budget report, we're budget neutral at this point. We haven't had any additional spending. I would like to remind everyone about the MLK program tomorrow afternoon at 4 o'clock. I think it's going to be a wonderful program. And
Friday.
Or,
I wish
Just because I
Friday was
thought today was
tomorrow.
Thursday.
I'm
it's
with you.
Friday afternoon
Yes.
at 4 o'clock. I don't know why I thought today was Thursday.
I did too,
The
all
week
day.
has been going like that.
Yeah. So please come out. It's going to be a wonderful event. Again, it's an opportunity for the community and countywide to kind of come out and celebrate Dr. King's legacy. And there's no better way to do it than everybody getting together and
And
sharing some space.
Great. That transitions us quite nicely to the last item on or second to last item on the agenda, announcements. Anybody else have announcements?
There's also the MLK choir performance at Cranard. Is that Sunday the 18th?
Yes, I believe so.
So,
What we can do
at
is we
5
can put
p.m.,
that
I
up
believe?
on our,
Yeah,
Yes,
there's a whole
UPTV.
list of activities. If
Yeah.
you could get a pointer up on the website to the list of them, that would be terrific.
yeah, that would be great.
Anything else? All right, seeing no other business, motion for adjournment,
So move, all motion.
and a second.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Second that.
Good night.